Right. Oh my God. Okay. Well,
Yeah,
it's a mishmash of everything clashing down there. It seems like at this point, it's like the
yes,
halfway through of the globalization process in a way. I don't know what's going on. It's so weird.
right, exactly. You get to watch as it's forming.
Horrible in a way,
Yes,
isn't it?
very much so.
Yeah. So, okay, this was your first stop, and obviously not a good. I mean, were you like sick like this all of the journey, or was just this at the beginning of it?
Well, it was pretty amazing because by the time we got to Tikal, the nausea had stopped. I was still pretty run down and wondering if I was, I was supposed to film that night, the ceremony, and I was wondering if I was going to make it. Or the next night, I'm sorry, the next day we'd start hauling up the mountain, and I woke up that next morning in a puddle of sweat. My whole tent was actually dripping water from the inside. My sleeping bag was completely saturated, and I had passed all of the sickness on. I was from that point on, I was free.
You were sweating it out,
great.
as it were. You
Amazing.
Yeah, you were sweating it out, as it were.
Yeah.
Ah.
Whatever is in that brown juice. They kept me on a regimen of brown juice for the next week.
Okay. How long were you down there, by the way? In total?
About 3 weeks.
Oh, wow, that's a long time actually.
Yes.
And you managed, everything went well. You had, money to eat and so forth. What happened?
It was amazing, Henrik. I mean, it was just surprising how things went. I'll get into a couple of the synchronistic events that happened after the ceremony. But it was amazing how things felt. Give you an example. I stopped in San Cristobal, and here I was. I didn't speak any Spanish, and this is my first Mexican city. And I'm standing there at the bus station going, oh, no, what do I do now?
Right.
I don't really even know where I'm going. And I see a Canadian couple, and I see they're speaking English, so I go and grab a hold of them and start talking to them. And I'm like, okay, you can help me,
Right.
I was really a stranger in a strange land. And a girl came to us and invited us to a hostel, which was Mi Casa, and it was just the most wonderful hostel ever. Of course, it was my first hostel, so I don't know any better, but it was beautiful and wonderful.
Right.
And I'm hanging out with all the people there at the hostel, and they're all from everywhere. There was a guy from England and a guy from Sweden and Norway, and just all over the place. Everyone was from somewhere else. And I'm sitting there speaking with the only other American that I had seen, and he was all excited because I was the only other American he had seen in quite some time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And we're discussing America and the state of the world. And he's getting into the 911 truth, and it was kind of interesting to watch because the British fellow, he couldn't take it. He would not accept any of the information, even though it was overwhelmingly true, and just, the one American, which they called the gringo, kept just pounding more facts into him, saying, look, it was an inside job. 911 was an inside job, and he just kept listing things. And while the British fellow was sitting there listening to this, he was twitching, and he was fidgeting, and he just could not accept this data.
Yeah.
And I saw that, the real issue here is that if people accept this data, their whole world has to alter. They have to stop what they're doing. They have to change directions and find a new path.
Right.
Because all of a sudden, it's not what you think it is anymore.
That's exactly right, and that's why people avoid it. It's scary, and it's too upsetting overall. And I think even though they might not consciously think of it like that, it's they know it, so to speak, in the back of their mind that if I let this in the door, so to speak, the whole house of cards is going to collapse. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you could see that in this guy's face that
Right,
he knew,
right.
but he
Right.
just wasn't going to say he did. Well, so we get to talking, and I start telling them about some of the events that I'd been to, and I went to the World Trade Organization protest in Washington, D.C. This was after they had had that great fiasco in Seattle and shot everybody with rubber bullets and concussion grenades in Seattle over the WTO. So I said, well, if they're going to do that to my people, they're going to do it to me, and I went to D.C. for the WTO protest. This was back in the late 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, when I got there, the people had kind of done a mock protest and had walked to the area, and then they were all walking back to where they were all staying at this house in D.C., in Washington, D.C.
Right.
And as they were walking down the street, now there's 1,000 people walking down the street. maybe more. Well, yeah, it had to have been 2,000 people walking down this street. Well, half of them got blocked off by riot squads in between a block. Just a line of riot squads on one side and a line of riot squads on the other. And the next thing you know, these 600 people are held in the middle, and they're all arrested from that point. And there's another 1,000 of us on the other side of the police line that are completely ignored.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
And they start processing these people. They tell them, well, okay, all of the World Bank members can leave. So they let them through the police line. And then they say, okay, press, you can leave. And a couple of the smart hippies jumped with the press and left with them and got out of the mix.
Yeah, right.
But there were 10-year-old boys, 70-year-old ladies that were all trapped in the middle. And there were also Japanese tourists. Anyone that happened to be walking down that sidewalk in Washington, D.C. at that moment was rounded up. And they were all hauled off onto buses. There were 18 school buses, and then those were followed by city buses once they ran out of room in the school buses. They held these people for 14 hours without bathrooms, without any water, anything, and they processed them one at a time, giving them tickets for parading without a permit. And they were all charged $50 a head. The city made a quick $30,000, and everybody was out by morning. But now the interesting thing was, is as all these people were being held in the middle, I'm yelling at the riot squad, saying, you know, you're abusing these people's constitutional rights. This is completely unfair. It's wrong. Why am I not on that side of the line? What makes these people, you know, I was just yelling at all these riot squads.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not looking at me one bit. They don't turn their heads and look or anything. But I yell at them because, you know, my research into Freemasonry, I wanted to do a little test. So I yelled at these riot squads. I said, how many of you are widows' sons?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a code word for Freemason, having to do with their rituals. The widow's son is Hiram Abiff, who they pretend to be when they're initiated into the temple.
Right, right.
And the whole line of riot squads looked my way, and the lieutenants and the people in suits.
Well, certainly
they
those
all
guys.
Turned.
Right, right. Wow, that's
so I'm
interesting.
telling this story in San Cristobal to all the people there, and the one American that's there with me looks at me and he says, wait a minute, I remember you. He was one of the 600 that was arrested in the middle of the
really?
Madness.
There we go.
Now, strange enough, so was my roommate that when I moved to Austin.
Okay.
My first roommate in Austin was also one of those 600 people. And I had never met either one of these people before.
Right, right. So it's, well, you synced up at that place, and now you're meeting up again, what is it, about almost 10 years later at this point, down in Maya Land, right?
Exactly.
That's interesting.
How amazing was that?
Yeah, that's cool. So you became good friends, I guess, with these two people at this time?
I really did. I was only there for 2 days, but I really feel a bond with all of these people, especially him, especially the American, because we had shared these experiences. But that was on the way, so that was before I'd even met the Mayans or anything.
Okay.
But I already knew that I was on the right path, because here was these amazing coincidences already occurring.
Yeah. So so these friends of yours, they were invited by the Rainbow Gathering crowd. Is that it here, or?
No. Actually, it was one brother named Giannis that met with the Mayans one day. I never really got how he ended up there with them, but they told him alone that they needed this tribe of nations to gather, that they needed a unification of the world at this ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
They knew it was going to be the first time this ceremony was performed all night long, and they knew that a tribe of nations had to gather. So they only told this one person, and then from Giannis, it just spread to all of us. I would say there were about 20 to 30 of us, but really a core of about a dozen that were the solid core that went the whole trip.
Okay. Yeah, there we go. So this was the first ceremony you said, and take that for us again. What was kind of the overarching idea of the ceremony and all? Take that for us again.
Okay, well, the ceremony's effect was to contact the ancestors and to receive guidance, and also to pledge their allegiance and to show that they aren't Mayans.
Right.
And it was very difficult. It was a difficult trip, when we got there, they told us we couldn't do it.
Who told?
The government owns Tikal, and you're not allowed to stay there overnight.
Okay.
So at first they were told, sure, come on, and then once we got there, we were told no. And it was interesting because there were two Masons. One of them was the Mayan Tata who was performing, one of the Tatas performing the ritual was a Freemason. And then there was also another Mexican fellow there that was also a Freemason. And when we got word that we couldn't do it, these two got on their telephones and started making their contacts.
Wow.
And so it was really the Freemasons that made sure that this ceremony happened.
Okay, what would you classify that as? Ironic or very nice, good?
Yeah, I never expected when I started talking about Freemasonry that people would think that I had chosen a side of their good or their bad, because really it's just that, hey, look, people are performing magic. That's what I'm trying to show you.
Right.
I'm not trying to say, this group's the bad one and that one's the bad one. There are many, many good Masons, and most are good Masons. Sure. And so, well, it was an interesting trip because once we had gotten up the hill, once we got there, there was another group of Mayans finishing up their ceremony. And the one Mayan Tata, I was getting some pictures and filming him, and I watched as he got sprayed in the face from the mouth by this other Mayan with something. I don't know what they were spraying in his face, but he spit it all in his face. But it turns out that this Tata went and tried to abduct one of the girls from our group. She was a large German girl, and she just put him in his place.
Oops. Right.
But then he went after a younger, smaller girl and tried to grab her and actually, kissed her, and she broke free. And they both came running back to tell us what had happened.
Okay.
But me not speaking any Spanish, I had no idea this was going on.
So what was that all about?
Well, it was a good show of what tribal life is like, because the tribe is self-regulating, and this is something that's gotten lost in our isolation in the 21st century. But what we saw was that these Mayans took care of it, not in any violent ways, but this man was then run out of the area and was not allowed back to the ceremony. He wasn't part of our group. He was a different group.
Well, good riddance, I guess.
Yes.
That's weird.
But then they were all very depressed and sad about and the bus ride was difficult, so everybody was tired, and the Mayans actually started crying at this time. The Tatas started crying.
Okay.
And so all of us came and we gathered around them and just held them before the ritual began.
Okay.
And it was really hard not to cry too.
So this was after the first ceremony, or was this a few days into the trip that you guys were making around the area, or?
This was after we had arrived at Tikal. We had hauled all of the ceremonial goods and fruits and everything else up the mountain, and had begun to get ready for the ritual. So the other shamans of the other Mayan group were ending their ritual, and everyone was to leave at this point. At 9 o'clock, the park is closed, but we had received special permission. And that's not to say that I didn't have to skirt by a guy with a big gun to get in there, asking me for my ticket or whatever. I didn't really know. I just no habla español and kept walking,
Right.
But so we had made it up to the mountain. We had up to the pyramids, and we had began to get everything ready. And they were having a little group circle before the ceremony, and also discussing the potential abduction of the girls, which I didn't know that was going on.
Right.
I just thought we were, having our circle before the ceremony.
So who was, arranging this with all the buses and things like this? Was this the Maya folks who were doing this, or were just traveling along the regular routes that go down there, or what happened?
No, they paid the way.
Right.
And I don't know who it was that was my